Hey everybody, welcome back to Great Mondays Radio. I am so thrilled to have on today one of the godfathers of modern brand, as it were, Patrick Hanlon. He has written the seminal book Primal Branding, which is required reading at YouTube. He's on the Fast Company executive board and the founder of Primal Branding, the agency, and was lucky enough to connect with him, and he's willing to spend some time with me. And we thought it would be really interesting to talk about the overlap or the intersection of brand and culture. Patrick, amazing to have you on. Thank you so much for coming on Great Mondays Radio.
Hey Josh, it's great to be recording this on a Monday. So much authenticity. I can just feel it.
Yeah, exactly. We record on Mondays, we release on Mondays. It's very easy strategy there. So, a lot of my listeners aren't familiar with your work. Are you able to give us a little boilerplate of primal branding, and so that at least we have
Yeah,
a foundation to move forward from here?
yeah. And so it started out as branding. I was in advertising marketing and with Fortune 50, brand names, people we all know.
Yeah.
Always wanted to work on things where I didn't have to explain to my mother what they did. And I did, luckily. And the I noticed that there was something crazy going on there. And this was back, I mean, this is totally old school, but back in 1999 or 2000. And people were talking about the Nike tribes, the Apple cult, and so forth, but they couldn't really describe how to create those things other than imitating them,
Yes.
right?
Right.
And
Right.
at
Right.
that
Right.
same
Right.
time, Google and Starbucks, who did not advertise, didn't spend any money on advertising, were sweeping across the nation and in cyberspace for Google and and malls and street corners everywhere for Starbucks. And how do you explain that? And there was no explanation really. Here's the tech guys, well, crazy tech guys, named Google. Who knows why people are going to them, right? And Starbucks was all about experience and better coffee or whatever. And so I kind of started looking at the commonalities. I asked myself, why do we really care about some companies, not about others? Which was there was a thing called Love Marks that was out there at the
Yep.
time from
Yep.
Saatchi.
Saatchi.
Love Brands was out there, I think. And so anyway, this whole notion of emotional branding was surfacing, and I asked myself, were there any commonalities between all of these things? And turns out that there were. And no one had looked at it like that before. But I had sort of a background, and I majored in humanities in college. I had a background in anthropology and a little bit, this much, but still, it
Hmm.
gave me a background for looking at things and trying to figure out the structural anthropology. And so and all these brands had a creation story. They had a background story. Apple started in the garage. Nike started, or the trunk of Phil Knight's car. Starbucks started at Pike Place. Amazon started in the Stanford, dorm room, right? And then they had a creed: think different, just do it. E pluribus unum. They all had, so once we knew where you were from and where you were about, we had to be able to identify you through flags, logos, storefronts, etc., smells. And then once we knew where you're from, we knew what you're about, we could identify you. There were rituals, different kinds of rituals, which Google invented search, right? Starbucks gave us a place to have coffee in the morning. That wasn't our kitchen. And Nike, introduced marathons, right?
Yep.
And then special lexicon, words we had to learn: ice grande, skinny decaf latte at Starbucks, uploading, downloading, searching, on the internet, Apple and so forth. And then there was a group that did not want to participate: Mac versus PC, Starbucks versus Maxwell House, Dunkin' Donuts, whatever, Red Bull these days, right? And then there was a leader. And so when you have these seven pieces of code, these lined up, so that you actually could create what we call a strategic brand narrative. So if you are, and this costs no money to do,
Yep.
you can create, here's where we're from, here's what we're all about. Here's the way we do things. Here's the language that we use. Here's what we're not, don't want to become. Here's the way we do things. And here's the group that's leading. Here's the team. And once you're
Yeah.
able to do that, whether you're a startup or you're a 150-year-old organization that wants to um, become relevant all over again to the new generation, the next generation, which since you're 150 years old, you've done this before, right? But here, this gives you a systematic approach to it, so you're not molding fog.
Right.
And basically, what that gets down to then, after having worked on this since I did this in 2001, the summer of 2001, and then September 11th happened, and no one wanted to hear about a new idea in branding. But a few years later, we did get a two-page spread in Advertising Age that talked about us, and on from there. And required reading at YouTube and so forth. So the what we've discovered since then is that, and this is what you talk about all the time, is that brands are communities of people who are driven by a belief system, these seven pieces of code. And not only that, but that these seven pieces of code, anything that is a noun basically has a community that surrounds it. I used to joke, that, Yetis um, and so forth. What's the word for the guy that's out in the West Coast? The Yeti, but he's
Bigfoot?
also covered in fur.
Yeah. Bigfoot?
Bigfoot, thank you. Even
Yeah.
big people believe in Bigfoot or UFOs or whatever, and and people laugh, but they have a creation story. They have a creed. They have they're iconic,
Yeah.
and you can see them identify them from their silhouette, right? Bigfoot, and they have all seven pieces of code. So does a spoon. We did a workshop last week before, and I said all of a sudden, a spoon. It's not a fork. It's not a knife. It has a creation story, came from somewhere, whether your mother told you or whatever. It has a specific purpose, excuse me, has a specific shape to it. It's iconic. And, you use it instead of a knife or a fork in different situations or instead of
What's
chopsticks
what's
and
the
so
what's
forth
the
and so
motto
on.
of a spoon?
Um,
Is it slurp?
I I think that would be iconic. Yeah, for a spoon. I think yeah, we've had that figured out. Yeah, I'm a spoon. I don't know. Eat with me.
Eat with
Use me for soup.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If you don't feel
But
comfortable drinking from a cup, drinking
yeah.
this item from a cup, use a spoon. So
But
what's yeah,
as you know,
yeah,
as we all know, we build our life through stories. Eat this, not that. Use this, not that. Use a spoon, not the fork. Right?
right.
Carry on with that. But we do that, and people tell us, from the time moment we're born, your son, daughter, cousin, grandchild, et cetera, et cetera. This is your house. This is your room. This is your house. This is the street we live on. This is our neighborhood. This is the town we live in. And on and on. And when you go to school, you're told a whole new set of stories about what you're good at and what you're not good at, right? And you use these stories to build your identity,
Yep.
basically, who you
Yep.
are. This is
Yep.
who I am. I live here, not there, and so on and so forth. I believe in this, not that. And that is built up. And then we hit the teenage years, and we might want to change some of those stories about ourselves or about where we live or about who we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then we started deciding what we want our icons to be, the clothes we wear, et cetera, et cetera. And then we go out into the world, and and this is where the great disconnect starts to happen, and we wind up following someone else's story generally because we're taught to go out and get a job.
Mm-hmm.
And when we could, I mean, we live in the United States, and which is the only country in the world where the taxes, the laws, and so forth are built so that we can go out as individuals and using our own native ingenuity, um, create something. You know, we could go out and be caterers. We can go out, build, buy a franchise. We can go out, start something from scratch, bootstrap or whatever, use a startup,
Yeah.
um, and so forth. Or even while we're in the startup, even if we went to Stanford, ground zero for startups, our mother wishes that we go out and find a real job with
Right.
health benefits and so forth and so
Right.
on.
Because that's the story that
And,
she has.
and that's the disconnect, right? And so let's say you work in a cube for someone else, and you can be Tim Cook, who has a great job, but he's still fulfilling Steve Jobs' dream. Anyone who works at General Electric is fulfilling Thomas Edison's dream, right? And so you wind up, at some point in time, um, it hits you that, oh, maybe I didn't want to do this for my whole life. Maybe I wanted to do something else, which becomes our midlife crisis, right?
Mm.
And so I would suggest that maybe some of the problems that we have in our society, personal problems and so forth, that people are struggling with these days, come from that disconnect, and that midlife crisis or that work-life balance is really about the fact that you'd rather be doing something else.
That's interesting. So as you're describing this kind of I origin story, and I've told this before, the story before on the podcast, but I grew up in a brand agency, right, in the brand world, and what I
Yeah.
realized is that so many of these organizations that we had developed brand promises for, just let's just call it that, they weren't able to deliver on them, and that's how I discovered, it wasn't an immediate realization, but that's how I discovered the idea of bringing that brand, those skills that I use to develop brands inside to help the people actually make that brand promise come to life
Yep.
through the idea of culture. And so I'm
Yep.
bringing these brand principles, these brand strategies that you're talking about internally. And so that's, I think, a good place to kind of start at this conversation around what you're observing with your clients today, and what the adjacencies or the overlap are
Yeah.
between brand and culture, and why should the people who listen to this podcast, mostly folks in the people operations space, care, right? Why
Yeah.
that's not their job. They're not in the marketing department. That's the CMO's job.
Yeah, brand is really a misnomer, I think. And what we do, in effect, is work with the CEOs and HR and finance to really, and the marketing people if they brought us in, or
Yeah.
the innovation people if we entered through that door. The is go back and reverse engineer either the brand slash product, or the company itself,
Yep.
and go backwards, reverse engineer it, figure out, okay, what was the creation story? We worked with one company that was 100 and some years old, and we asked what the creation story was, and they said, well, it was a part of the international foods purchase. So we we went back and discovered that it actually started somewhere else. So there's the authenticity right there. So the authenticity is built in,
Mm.
and and then what do we believe in? And so all of this starts to become authentic, organic. Um, and some people realize through the process. So we go back through, figure out all the pieces of what we call primal code, create that strategic brand narrative. Here's where we started. Here's what we're all about. Here's how you know it's us, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the way we like to work. Here's the language that we use.
Yeah.
And here's what we're not, never want to become. And when you build that, you create a magnetic pool, um, which attracts people who share your beliefs. Once you build a belief system, you attract others who share your beliefs. That creates community, and it becomes an authentic, organic community
Yep.
of people who want to be like you and they want to belong to a place like you. And it's done out of love and service rather than through sales or some other persuasive
Coercion.
coercion. Yeah.
So
or just needing a job.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
I mean
yeah,
that's my hypothesis too. That's what drives the reason why I've committed my career to culture is
mhm.
because I want organizations to be able to articulate who they are so that not just customers on the outside can be like, "Oh, I want to be part of the Apple tribe or the Nike
Yeah,
tribe," but that
yeah,
the employees on the inside feel passionate about that and can find a place that fulfills that, or aligns with that
yeah.
personal ambition.
It resonates from the inside out because if your people don't believe in what they're doing, they're not going to be able to convince someone else,
That's
right?
right.
Which ultimately is about marketing, sales, so-called branding. And you look at all the great companies that are out there that still exist, the Patagonias, the North Faces, in that sector, um, some of the other brands that are uh, into responsible banking practices and so forth
Yeah.
and yeah, and other things that we like that are out there. New companies generally, new food companies that aren't packed with preservatives and so forth, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're modeling themselves. They need to model themselves after the community, the culture, their communities, and the culture have to be in sync. So
I mean, I think a lot of the examples that we're talking about are
did I
very.
articulate that right? I don't,
Yeah, well, I mean, I
okay.
think, I mean, so here's a clarifying question. A lot
Yeah,
of, and this comes up a lot in brand as well, is that a lot of the examples we're talking about are consumer facing products. They're sexy iPhones and, amazing shoes and all that. Um, is it possible to do this for B2B brands? Because there's a lot of
yeah,
tech
absolutely.
software, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
is it applicable? I mean, explain if you don't
absolutely.
have the amazing colored puffy jacket from Patagonia, right? Like, how are you doing it?
Yeah. So we do it through the same practices. And actually, it's in some ways it's easier in B2B because it's so unexpected. But but we've had wild, crazy success in B2B. And just because people in that, I don't want to overgeneralize, but people in that category, B2B really doesn't apply anymore. I mean, those B to C, C to they don't really apply anymore because people are people. And I think through social media and just the way that our cultures have
Yeah,
evolved
yeah,
or
yeah.
devolved, whatever was going on. But
Fair.
well, I mean, you take your work home with you, right? I
Yep.
mean, I don't know that you ever necessarily leave work, right?
Yep. Yep. Not
Yeah,
anymore.
and so the that hard line between I'm at work, I'm at home now doesn't exist like it did for our parents, and so so it's really about I think I want to say that 20 years ago I was the only person talking about brands were communities, and I would be in Las Vegas, talking to many hundreds of people sitting out there, and they would all have X's in their eyes. They would think that I was talking about um, either a church group or something
Yep.
else, right?
Yep. Yep. A cult,
And
worst case
so
scenario.
but I don't know what the other word would be for it,
Hmm. Hmm.
but it's pretty well expressed now and explains what we're all about, and people are coming around to that. And I remember that in 2005 or so, I wrote a piece called "A Spirit Guide to Building Brand Communities."
Mm.
But Spirit Guide, people are going to think this is flaky West Coast stuff, but now people wouldn't even blink, I don't think.
No, I
Right?
think you're right. I think you're
Yeah.
right. Do you have any examples, just to bring it to life? It doesn't have to be a client that you work with, but it certainly could be of successful B2B organizations applying brand in a successful way, quote unquote brand.
Sure. Yeah. I don't really talk about our stories, but the our clients that we've worked with, that's their story to tell. But we worked during COVID, we worked with a couple companies that were very successful. One of them was this is you don't get much more B2B than this, but they built assembly lines. And
Wow.
that helped to build the iPhones. And and they, in that case, we changed their name, altered their name, gave them a new logo, and did all the typical branding kinds of things, brand ID and so forth. But we also helped to create the culture, a new
Hmm.
culture for them. And that project came out of, I spoke at a university, and someone in the audience circled back with me. In another case, this is also very B2B, but some safety consultants, we connected with them. And that again was sort of like a rebranding project. We had someone do a new logo and all that kind of stuff. And we don't always do that. A lot of times we just stay at the 30,000 foot level, strategic level. But in these two cases, we did the other things, and they both had serious double-digit growth as a result,
Hmm.
maybe more. Yeah.
So I mean, the same, you're really talking, and I appreciate how you're saying it's almost easier, right? It's the same market forces where this branding, this concept of authenticity and radical differentiation, where you're able to articulate this personality, this persona, and this belief system that sticks in people's brains, right? So you're just working, and the primal
These,
piece is
yeah.
that like, mammalian or the lizard brain, right? Like that's really what
Both of them, all of them. Yeah.
all the brains.
Yeah, I think it's unilateral. Yeah, no, I think that yeah, you're right. And the thing is that each piece of code, by the way, is a point of differentiation.
Yep.
And there are seven pieces, and if you just have 1%, you're 1% different, and your idea, you wrote it on a post-it note, right? And in an ideation session. And some people might have your same story and everything, but if you're different by 1%, at the end of it, you're 7% different,
Yeah.
which is big
Yeah.
in a lot of sectors, right? And
Yeah.
so it's doable. And so but I should point out that because those are 7 points of differentiation, you then get to determine, okay, where do we communicate those? Do we over social, digital, and traditional, and I don't mean television advertising, but also experiential marketing,
Yep.
going to Vegas or wherever, outdoor advertising, et cetera, et cetera. So over social, digital, and traditional media, and where do you put the creation story on LinkedIn, Facebook, as an ad,
Hmm. Hmm.
whatever. Yes, yes, and yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, and yes.
yeah,
One of the big points in the culture space, the channels that I have seen a great rise in is the kind of about us uh, company page, web page, right? Where it's like what
yeah,
it's like to, or like sometimes it's like culture at ampersand, culture at company, or
yeah,
whatever it
yeah,
might be. And I think it's such a big opportunity, and I've seen it done well. We had a client a few years ago, PagerDuty, who does this really well. And they have these little videos from all their employees that say, "Hey, this is what I do. Here's what I do." And they're like little baseball
yeah,
cards on the page. I think
yeah.
it's so wonderful to see that expression. And it goes back to exactly what you talked about a moment ago, which is that kind of alignment internally and externally. And you're like, oh, this company is what they say. Look at these people. Look at how they're talking about it. And I don't know. I think, have you worked on any of that? Have any of your clients worked on it
Yeah.
or had that opportunity kind of expressing that, the brand in that very specific use case, right? Attracting employees.
Absolutely. Yeah. As a matter of fact, we were, I don't know, involved or whatever in the largest media crowdfund. There's a lot of adjectives in here. I want to get them right. The largest media
Okay.
crowdfund raise in history. With I'll just sitting right here. The shout out to Daryl Eves in his book YouTube Formula, where in chapter 18 he describes how they built their creation story for their crowdfund raise, which was to build um, their media thing, which is called the Chosen, the Chosen, which is story about Jesus Christ and those who, from the point of view of those who knew him. Familiar with that?
Yeah, right, right. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so so they did that and then and pushed that forward through the creation story. And other people have done that too. And actually, I'm mentioning that because that's a great way of introducing so as the founders, the original producers and so forth, and they got together and they just put on video onto YouTube why they were doing this and what it meant to them.
Mm.
And that's kind of a same riff as the baseball card thing that you were talking about. It accomplishes the same thing. And why are people at the place that they're at?
Why do I care? Why should you?
Why do
If
I
I don't
care?
care,
Why
why
should
should
I
you
care?
care?
And it's all about, thank you. It's all about taking something that's meaningless and helping it to become meaningful
Mm-hmm.
from who cares to I care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I care so much in a lot of cases where I'm willing to stand in front of a tank or a bullet because I care. That's how much I care.
Mm-hmm.
So about building belief, right? And
It
belonging.
consumers and employees are very fickle these days. They move very quickly, right? We are the story that I always go back to around, it's like our grandparents worked for the same company for years.
Yeah.
And then our parents, like probably they had, 3 10-year stints. Now it's like if I talk with somebody who's like, oh, I've been in this company for 3.5 years, I'm like, oh, you're a veteran.
Three and a half
And the
months.
same,
Yeah.
right? And the same
Yeah.
for consumer goods and even social platforms, right? Where it's like, oh, well, whatever, everybody's over here. Now I'm on TikTok, whatever it is, and then the next thing comes
Yeah.
around. What I mean is that um depressing the value of investing in this kind of authenticity or increasing it because it's such a radically altered market. It's so hyper
Yeah.
active.
Well, I think that the ability to build this story, here's where we're from, here's what we're about, here's why we're different, how we're different, what we never, here is what we never want to become, et cetera, and building the language and all that is about building community. So people will stay with you through good times and bad times.
Mm,
And a lot of times what happens is that transitions happen. Yeah, well, I used to work at Instagram. Now I'm working at YouTube and I'm just about to go to TikTok, right? Or whatever, threads or whatever it is. And that happens. I mean, there are opportunists everywhere, and I used to be one. And so I think that's important. But the thing is that if people feel that they belong, um, they will stick with you over longer periods of time. And what happens a lot of times, of course, is that new enterprise starts or you get bought, right? And someone buys the company that you're working at, and all of a sudden you're being merged together with another organization that um, may or may not have the same values, that you do. I mean, look at Boeing and McDonnell Douglas. What's happened there,
yep.
right? Just
Yep.
to use an extreme example
Yep.
of a massive FU. But the um, what happens then is that even the long timers, old timers, or whatever you want to call them, people who've been there for a long time get dispirited, and I don't understand what's happening here anymore. I don't get it, and so the headhunters come in and pick the best people off and transport them to the next job, next opportunity, and there you have it. That's how you lose your culture.
I think it's interesting. So there is a story that McCord, I forget her first name, who was the original like head of HR at Netflix. She
Mhm.
talks about how Netflix grew so quickly, and there's this moment where people, and every growth organization has this moment where somebody, either in the senior leadership or down on down, says, it's just not like it wasn't before,
Exactly right. Yeah.
right?
I don't know what's
But
going on anymore.
I don't
Yeah.
know what's going to, but she argues, yeah, of course, we're growing and now we're moving in a different direction. And so, I mean, for me, it's clarifying because you do get stuck. Now, I think there are what I would argue is there's sort of the appropriate evolution and then like the inappropriate evolution. So you just mentioned Boeing or whatever it might be, and you kind of lose your mojo.
Yeah.
How do you tell the difference? I mean, what McCord was talking about in that case, she was like, "Uh-huh, and this is now how we're doing it. And it's okay if you don't want to be part of this part of the journey, right? There's certain kinds of people that want to be part of a startup or a growth or an enterprise, and that's
Mhm.
okay. So how do you message that? Is it sometimes it's okay? How do you know when you're going through that? Because I appreciate that as well. I've worked with a lot of different companies that have gone through mergers, right? Either been merged or gotten acquired. Um, and it is a very uncertain and difficult time. Should people, how do they know? Should they stay? Should they go? Is this it? Is this the downfall? Do you have any like advice for someone who's in that and you're like, uh-oh, here it comes. Like, is it good or bad? How do you tell?
Yeah. Yeah, we're called in frequently to help rearrange the story. I mean, there are cases where people have companies have bought so many other companies up that they no longer know what they're all about, which is sort of a Netflix thing. This isn't, I've never worked with Netflix, but I worked with someone else. And the same thing going on. And I think it's I mean, Netflix is kind of extreme because they went from sending DVDs out via the mail, right? And
Yep.
to being totally, downstreaming and so forth. The So they switched models, but their business model. And I think that it's okay. We used to be you do go through the same efforts, which is to what's our creation story? Where do we come from? We were doing this, now we're doing this. In evolution, here's what we believe in now, right? And which has got to change. It's not about sending the stuff through the mail or whatever, however they were doing that.
Hmm.
Um, it's it's gone to something that moved on to something else, and we're now in producing movies. Now we're not just sending them out; we're actually producing them, et cetera,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so um, that's a radical transformation. And so, but it's still manageable. I mean, some people, if your job was to make sure the disc got out on time, you may have to rethink your career plans, right? I mean, that's pretty radical.
Yeah.
So I think the thing is that in the other case that I was thinking of, not Netflix, but something else, um, and this is more typical, I think, of when companies get bought up and combined, is that who you spoke to about this company, the message you got from this company just depended upon who you spoke to and what their previous company that they worked with was.
Yep.
And so and you call someone else the following week and you get a totally different
Yep.
line,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And then at that point, it becomes just a line. It's
There's no
it's
authenticity, right?
not exactly, it's not authentic at all. And that was the problem. Yeah. And so that is a problem and in a huge billion-dollar organization. And it's
Can
not
you, I mean, so it
fixed.
sounds like you're saying you can
You
come in
can. You have
and
to rearrange your story. I mean, you have to understand and I think that's the problem is a lot of times we do attribute some of these things to either the PR, not PR, but the internal playbook,
yep.
right? HR playbook, or it's the branding or marketing playbook,
Yep.
or it's the sales playbook,
Yep.
or it's the engineering playbook, right? And so a product playbook. And what people have to understand is that there is an overarching, and this is why we prefer to work with CEOs rather than
Sure.
brand marketing or
Sure.
even HR people, because,
Yeah.
and we insist that the HR and finance and marketing people come to what we call as a primal dig, and bring everyone together. And usually these people aren't in the same meetings together ever,
Ever.
right? It used to be
Surprising, right?
a company picnic, but we don't have company picnics anymore. We used to have a holiday party, but we don't have those anymore either. And so
Yep.
the closest you'll get is this,
I know. Well, I have a
right?
whole we have a whole another conversation we can talk about the rituals bringing people together on those holiday parties.
So
I
yeah, let's not go there. That's
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
anyway, so we do this as a group, deconstruct the company, and oftentimes it's the first time they've talked about it in the same room together,
Yeah.
and we come at it from from a discipline that is atypical and kind of comes from the side and people pay attention to. We've had more than one CEO, or their assistant tell us, well, he's only got an hour. He or she only has an hour, and they cancel their meetings for the rest of the day and stay at this thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because it's so powerful.
yeah,
It's amazing. All right, so one more thread that I want to dig into, and I want to kind
sure.
of zoom in a little bit further. And one of the questions I've gotten throughout my career, time and time again, what if my CEO, executive, blah blah blah, doesn't believe in my case, like this idea of like investing in culture, and in your case, investing in the system of Primal Brand. Is it possible for a business unit, an organization, or even a team to go through their own system? Or whether your executive believes it
Sure.
or not, like, is that a
Yeah.
possibility? Can you do that?
Absolutely. We do that with innovation and startups inside the organization, launching a new product and so forth. And it helps people to take that product, then wrap a story around it so that they can convince their boss, but not only their boss can convince his boss, and on the way up. And that's how they help get funding. That's how they stay alive in some
Hmm.
corporations, organizations.
Hmm.
And that's how we've had a lot of success with that because if you can tell this story. Here's where we're from. Here's what we're about. Here's how you use us. Here's the language that we're using. Here's what we're not. Here's how we're not in a large corporation. What
Yep.
we're not is stepping on someone else's territory, right?
Yeah.
Or product line.
Yeah.
And here's the team that's doing it. You've just gone through all seven pieces, and so for some reason, those pieces tickle both the rational parts of our brains and the emotion that makes sense and the emotional parts that create desire. And for some reason, there's a side effect of that is that people feel, oh, that makes sense. And if you make more sense than the team before you or the team after you, you usually win. And so
Right.
so
Right.
we've had that going for us, and a lot of times, and it works. And if you go to our Instagram at Primal Branding on Insta, you'll see that there are some um, hockey stick
Yeah.
data metrics there
Yeah.
of people before using Primal Branding and after. And those are, audience figures, but the same thing happens, on the ground.
Internally.
Yeah.
It, so to wrap this up, what I am hearing in our kind of the interplay of our beliefs, which I think are very aligned, is that clarity, this idea of clarity is the key. It's you're providing a step-by-step structure to develop a clarifying story. Here
Content.
is where we're playing, here's where we're
Yeah.
not playing, here's what we're doing, here's what we're not doing. And that's powerful in and of itself. But I would venture to say that even more important is that alignment with your team. Just like you were just saying, the executive team is getting together. They're like, oh, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. And you're like, you guys have got to, you all have to come together and understand that this is an important piece to highlight and outline and delineate so that it becomes this guiding principle, which really goes back to, again, how I think about culture as this lens through which are able to we're able to look through to make better decisions for the organization. And that to me is I think that's what I think is the real power of this, the structure that you're saying we need to just stop. Everybody stop for a freaking moment. We need
Mhm.
to talk about these key pieces because as humans, that's what we connect to. I do not care about feeds and speeds, right? That's what we used to talk about.
They're magnetic poles in a way, yeah. And they are in aggregate, they pull us toward you and not toward someone else. And it also pulls us toward being in the right, communicating the right thing in the right media because you're communicating where your advocates are.
Yeah.
already are. So
Yeah.
if they're not on TikTok, you don't do it on TikTok. If they're not on Facebook, you don't do it on Facebook,
Yeah.
and vice versa. And so
Yeah.
um, so it helps that way. But what it helps to do most of all, most effectively, I think, is to um, get rid of, branding. If you ask 10 people what branding is or what it's all about, you get 10 different answers.
Yeah.
And that's such I'll just say disconnect again, because nowhere else in any sector are you able to be that wishy-washy about something, right? It's like
10
voting
different answers to
fraud,
the to
right?
finance. Hey, what's finance?
Yeah,
What's IT?
yeah, yeah. And you just expect some foggy answer about, the brand, et cetera, et cetera. But
Yeah.
this really gives people, I mean, you can always figure out what your creation story is. You can figure out what you believe in. You
Yep.
can figure out what your icons are. You
Yep.
can figure out what you don't want to be and the language that you use to surround it. And you can figure out who the leadership team is, et cetera, et cetera. And so these are assets that you already have, but you just didn't realize that you were supposed to communicate those in a structured way across social, digital, and traditional media. And by the way, in the US, people need to see in 5 different places before they're aware that you exist.
Yeah.
That's an Edelman study. Um,
I thought it was
and then
seven.
it
So
takes,
five's a deal.
but well, yeah, and 5 or 7, some people
Yeah.
say 7. And then it takes 100 hours to make a friend. And so that's a
Yeah.
lot of YouTube.
Yeah.
It's a lot of Instagram, right?
Right. Right.
But
Right. Right.
but it gives CEOs, CFOs, CEOs, CFOs, a sense of the dimensionality of this. I mean, it becomes, instead of a spreadsheet, it becomes 3 or 4D, and I think that in today's omni-channel universe where it can be mind-boggling,
Yeah.
this gives some kind of sensibility to it.
Yeah. Amazing. This has
I
been
hope.
incredible. I
I
really
hope.
appreciate your time. Patrick Hanlon,
It's been
who
fun, Josh.
is the author of the one and only Primal Branding. You can learn more about him at primalbranding.co. Patrick, thanks for coming on Great Mondays Radio. This was really, really informative.
Have a great rest of the week.